still young and mankind was just beginning its journey, God created people in His image and likeness. He gave them reason, freedom of choice, and the ability to create for the good of the world. However, God also created witches, beings with special powers and associated with the magical powers of nature. Aware of their potential, God decided to share some of His power with witches and give them a special purpose. He summoned the witches together and told them that they should help those people who were helpless instead of Him. To use their abilities for good and justice to create balance and help those in need of protection and healing. They became the guardians of nature, preserving its balance and caring for the well-being of all living beings. Witches, possessing their unique abilities, have become an integral part of society. They were in harmony with nature and divine powers, embodying goodness, wisdom and compassion. People recognized their importance and turned to them for help and advice in various life situations. For many centuries, witches continued to listen attentively to the words of God and to fulfill them with devotion and love for people. They were the link between the physical and spiritual worlds, taking on the role of patrons and guardians of humanity. Witches were there in moments of joy and sorrow. They helped to cope with difficulties, healed body and soul, comforted and guided in the right direction. They advised in love affairs, helped in the search for the lost, predicted the future and warned of possible dangers. Experienced and wise. They accumulated knowledge and improved their abilities in order to better serve people. Because of their divine connection, witches had a deep understanding of human nature and needs. In a world where good and evil fought for supremacy, witches were advocates of light and justice. They not only helped individuals, but also engaged in battles with dark forces, protecting the peace and well-being of all. Witches provided their help and love to all who needed them, regardless of race, creed or social status. Nowadays, witches no longer fulfill their destiny among people with love and devotion. Instead, they face misunderstanding, fear, and harassment from society. Under the influence of religious and social prejudices, some people ranked witches among the forces of evil and demonized their essence. Instead of seeing them as helpers and healers, they accused witches of causing calamities, illnesses, and misfortunes. Panic and hysteria took over society, and crowds of people demanded the execution of witches, considering it a way to cleanse from evil and protect society. Witches have become victims of untruth and intolerance. Despite their noble nature and good intention to help people, they have become victims of superstition, prejudice and ignorance. Their abilities and magical gifts arouse fear and suspicion in people, and instead of seeing them as allies and guardians, many see only a threat. Instead of understanding and appreciating the gifts of witches, people choose to condemn and destroy them. Outbreaks of violence and brutality have become an insurmountable part of this dark life. Shrieks and shouts rose from the crowd of people, filling the air with ferocious demands for revenge and bloodshed. People gripped by hysteria and fear of the unknown and incomprehensible, called for the destruction of witches in the most cruel forms. Those who watched the execution dissolved in this dark energy, feeling satisfaction from the spectacle of death and suffering. Bizarre smiles and grimaces of pleasure loomed on the faces of some spectators. The crowd of bitter people became more and more ruthless, demanding more and more victims, even if there was no connection with magic or sorcery between the victims. The instincts of violence and revenge took possession of them, and they rushed forward, devoid of compassion and the ability to distinguish between good and evil. It was a time when reason and compassion gave way to irrationality and mass hysteria. They believed that it was witches who were responsible for all the misfortunes and disasters that befell society. The witches hanging in front of the crowd looked humiliated and disfigured, but the people were adamant in their decision. Some people took pleasure in the death of witches and enjoyed the spectacle, believing that they were celebrating victory over dark forces and promoting righteousness. It was a horrible and cruel rite that embodied the dark sides of human nature. The witch hunt in the Lydian Empire was an eerie and dark celebration that inspired crowds of people. In those days, witches were seen as the embodiment of evil and darkness, and their eradication became the goal and pride of society. The celebration began with a solemn meeting in the main square of the city. They anticipated the ominous moment when the names of the witches who became the objects of the hunt would be announced. On the main square, gallows were erected, on which witches were executed. Crowds of people watched the execution with excitement and joy, shouting and applauding at each death penalty. The witch, standing in front of a crowd of suicide bombers, felt the last attack of fear and despair. Her eyes, usually filled with wisdom and compassion, were now filled with bitterness and anger. Tears made up for her eyes like the last breath of hope. The words she uttered before her execution sounded with heavy grief and humility. She, once a benefactor and public intercessor, understood that all her wisdom and knowledge would remain unused and swept away into the ashes of history. In the depths of her heart, she was aware of the untruth and cruelty of this act, but the power of evil that permeated the crowd overwhelmed her mind. The tears shed by the witch were tears not only for her own fate, but also for humanity, which neglected wisdom and kindness, preferring to plunge into the darkness of ignorance and hatred. The witch realized that her death would not bring true good, but only continue the cycle of violence and suffering. But even in the last moments before death, the witch retained pride and strength of her spirit. Her eyes, though pierced with bitterness, emitted a spark of determination and protest against the injustice that was performed before her. Her death sentence was an unwavering cruelty that triumphed over human compassion and reason. Meanwhile, in the Leiden Empire, located in the Salsavir region, the heavy air is permeated with heat and sultry winds. The sky over the desert is the main decoration of this place. Its deep blue color creates a beautiful contrast with the sand dunes and debris scattered throughout the desert. The reflection of its rays creates the illusion that the desert is burning with fire. The wind, carrying sandstorms, howls in the ears and creates beaches of sand sculptures, gradually changing their shape under the influence of natural forces. Among the desert expanses you can find scattered debris, testifying to past events and the mysterious history of this place. The wreckage may be fragments of ancient structures that have been abandoned and forgotten in this inhospitable environment. They serve as a reminder of the transitory nature of civilization and the secrets they hold. Everything around is filled with an atmosphere of solitude and irreplaceable beauty. While the terrain may seem tough and lifeless, it also has its own unique appeal. Native plants and animals have adapted to living in this harsh environment, and their presence adds a touch of life and mystery to the otherwise inhospitable desert. The first voice, imbued with impatience and excitement, broke the silence around with the question of distance to the border. There was a mixture of excitement and anxiety in his sharp and breath-catching tone. The first voice, exhausted by the heat of the desert and exhaustion, exhaled words expressing his physical and emotional state. There was true exhaustion and despair in his voice. The first voice, imbued with a mixture of despair and irritation, pleaded with Chloe, hoping that she would hear him and provide at least a little support. However, the second voice, as if ignoring his request, answered with some aggression. A second voice, filled with hesitation, tried to convey the complexity of the situation in which they found themselves. He understood that everything around their existence might not be what it seemed, and he tried to find the right words to explain it. Adonis, the first voice, was a devoted assistant to witches, possessing strength and courage. There was despair and a certain irritation in his voice. On the other hand, Chloe Morgan, the Ice Witch, represented coldness and magical essence. There was a certain contempt and arrogance in her voice. The first voice, expressing his displeasure, uttered words of disgust, speaking of the unpleasant situation with the sand in his shoes. His voice sounded filled with irritation and discontent. Adonis, sincerely wishing to alleviate his condition, turned to Chloe, the Ice Witch, with a request to use his magic. He suggested cooling the area around them to relieve the discomfort of the sand in the boots. With hope in his eyes, he was sure that this would not cause any harm, but would only ease their path. Chloe, the Ice Witch, carried a power that was far from cheap or ordinary. Her magic was something much deeper and more powerful. She was connected to the power of ice and cold, which intertwined with her essence and defined her personality. As she looked at Adonis, her eyes expressed steadfastness and strength. They pierced his existence as if she could see his deepest essence and motives, but at this moment, when Adonis suggested using magic to cool down, Chloe reacted with fury. Suddenly, her voice pierced the air like an icy wind, and there was a cry of "idiot." She felt that he did not appreciate or understand the true power she carried within herself. She looked at him as if penetrating through his exterior and exploring his true nature. Complex emotions are involved in her gaze: rage, frustration, but also pride and self-affirmation. Chloe, with a distinct expression of annoyance, warned the guy that if he continued to complain, she would leave him put. In her hands, she held a card, which she twisted between her fingers, demonstrating her determination and intransigence. Suddenly, there were sounds from the device. Beep. This sound meant that the device had detected their location. Adonis, upon learning of this, turned to Chloe, informing her of the location he had found. Chloe, feeling agitated and dissatisfied, turned to the guy, asking him to wait. She reminded him that she had already told him not to use this strange device so as not to cause tracking. Her voice sounded angry and irritated, and she waved the card as a sign of her displeasure. The girl was well aware of the potential dangers associated with using this device and was alert to any signal manifestation or tracking. She didn't want to draw attention to her location and didn't want any trouble. Adonis, alarmed by Chloe's anger, clarified that this is not a strange device, but an ordinary smartphone. He showed her his phone, emphasizing that he had made it himself and that the signal would not be tracked. As a result of the heat, sweaty drops dripped down his face, reflecting his physical tension. Although Adonis tried to explain to Chloe that it was an ordinary smartphone, he felt physical discomfort from the heat. A stream of sweat poured down his soaked face, creating an unpleasant sensation. He looked exhausted, but despite this, he insisted on his capabilities and knowledge. In this difficult situation, Chloe and Adonis stood tensely in front of each other. Adonis used his knowledge of summoning magic to change the transmission signal used by interdimensional phones. He was able to create a magic shield around his smartphone that distorted and redirected the signal, making it unsuitable for tracing. This shield protected their position from detection by the army or any other opponents who might try to triangulate the signal. Adonis confidently and in detail told Chloe about his achievements and how their magic shield would ensure their safety and invisibility. His words were imbued with pride and confidence in his abilities. He explained that even if the army tried to trace the signal, they would not be able to detect their real position, thanks to Adonis' magic and technical skills. Adonis, continuing his story, noted that in the modern world, the use of paper maps and similar outdated methods is simply ineffective. He stressed that next time he will create a special device that will be convenient and useful for Chloe. However, when Adonis said these words, Chloe felt a surge of anger and indignation. Her eyes filled with rage and her face expressed determination. The girl was ready to kill Adonis for his arrogance and disrespect. The tension between them was growing, and there was tension and hostility in the air. Chloe could feel her hands clench into fists a little, and her face contorted with rage. Her eyes twinkled with indignation and determination to deal with Adonis for his inappropriate words. The situation became critical, and a moment of tension hung in the air. Chloe's violent blow rained down on Adonis, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground. The blow was so strong that the guy immediately turned out to be half fainting, covered with dust and sand. Adonis was lying on the ground, face down, and felt a sharp pain at the sight of the impact. He hadn't expected such a reaction from Chloe, and now he knew that he had paid for his complacency. Chloe, for her part, continued to stare at the map, adamant and ruthless. Her face was an expression of seriousness and determination, and her eyes sparkled with rage and frustration. She was completely confident in her action and believed that Adonis deserved to be punished for his arrogance and complacency. Everything was shrouded in tension and silence, interrupted only by the sound of the wind, which carried grains of sand through the desert terrain. Adonis lay on the ground, trying to come to his senses, while Chloe continued to study the map, ignoring his presence. Chloe broke the silence and spoke with insistence in her voice, sensing the growing threat of persecution. She pointed out the urgency of the situation and the need to focus on reaching the border in order to ensure her safety and return to her normal, peaceful life. Her voice reflected determination and strength, showing that she was willing to do whatever was necessary to find a country where witches were tolerated. This goal was their main priority, and Chloe was willing to do anything to achieve it. Adonis listened attentively to Chloe, aware of the seriousness of the situation. He felt that there was no more room for useless conversations and distractions. The real danger of persecution forced him to focus and take a new approach to their journey. Chloe turned to the guy with care and a smile, strengthening his faith in a successful future. She caught his doubts and need for stability, realizing that he was looking for a place where he could continue his education and develop. She promised to find a school where the guy could get an education, not only for her to expand her knowledge and skills, but also to gain support and understanding from other witches. Chloe's smile was genuine and kind, emphasizing her genuine desire to help the guy. She saw in him the potential and the desire for growth, and wanted to support him in achieving his goals. Chloe understood the importance of education and training for the future, and she promised to be there for him along the way. The guy frowned, disapprovingly greeting Chloe's suggestion of finding a girlfriend. It seemed to him that they should concentrate on their mission and not be distracted by personal relationships. His face expressed displeasure and some irritation. He felt that Chloe was distracting him from important things and creating unnecessary tension. The guy responded to Chloe's offer to find a school with reluctance. He felt that his true purpose was to serve witches and help them in their affairs. He did not see himself in the role of a student studying at school, but preferred to remain true to his appointment as an assistant. Embarrassedly lowering his eyes, the guy showed that his decision could cause some internal uncertainty. He may have been aware that his choices were different from conventional norms and expectations. However, at the same time, his determination to remain in the role of assistant was strong and sincere. This moment reflected his deep affection for Chloe and loyalty to his principles. He was willing to support and assist her in her adventures and missions, even if it meant giving up personal opportunities and privileges. He was willing to serve the witches and be their reliable assistant, even if it meant staying in the shadows and not receiving personal education or recognition. The guy, slightly puzzled by Chloe's words, expressed his misunderstanding. It seemed to him that Chloe was joking and entering into some kind of conversation that had nothing to do with the previous discussion. The guy was focused on his decision to remain an assistant to the witches and serve them, so he didn't understand why Chloe started making jokes about it. His misunderstanding and bewilderment were expressed in his remark. Perhaps Chloe tried to add some lightness and humor to the setting, but her joke didn't work and caused a misunderstanding in the guy. Chloe, noticing the boyfriend's bewilderment in his voice and facial expression, realized that her joke did not receive the expected reaction. She decided to stop joking and pretend it was just a joke. She asked the guy for forgiveness and explained that she was just joking, having no serious intentions or subtext in her words. Feeling a little embarrassed by her words, Chloe decided to defuse the situation and began to move forward as if nothing had happened. She left the guy at a loss, waiting for his reaction or decision whether to follow her. Her movements may have expressed some uncertainty or awkwardness after a bad joke, but she tried to demonstrate that she was willing to move on and forget about this awkward moment. He didn't understand why Chloe decided to make a joke at such a moment and how he should react to her apology. The guy stood still, watching Chloe move away from him. As she moved away, his anger began to gradually dissipate, giving way to softer emotions. He stopped focusing on his displeasure and began to look at Chloe with kind eyes full of warmth and interest. Previously tense and angry facial expressions were replaced by more open and soft. The guy began to realize that Chloe's reaction may have been just a joke, and he stopped taking her words seriously. He felt the anger disappear and was replaced by a feeling of closeness and sympathy for Chloe. This whole process happened at lightning speed, as emotions and reactions often occur on an unconscious level. The guy sighed quietly, immersed in his thoughts. He watched Chloe walk away and couldn't help but notice her calmness. His eyes reflected some bewilderment and slight sadness, as he could not figure out why she remained so calm in such a situation. Chloe maintained her equanimity. The guy pondered, thinking about the reasons for this behavior of Chloe. Maybe she had her own personal motives or just had the ability to control her emotions better than he. Either way, he felt a little embarrassed, not knowing how to properly respond to her calmness. The guy kept looking at Chloe, somewhat taken aback by her calmness and the smile she carried with her. Her smile seemed unwavering and soulful, as if she knew something he didn't understand. Seeing Chloe so calm, he felt some anxiety and bewilderment. Suddenly, it seemed to him a mystery that he had not yet solved. He felt that she possessed some secret knowledge that eluded him. A slight sadness flashed in his eyes as he thought of his negative feelings towards the Leiden Empire. Hatred filled his thoughts, remembering the past events that had led him to this attitude. Instead, he focused on Chloe and her smile. Adonis pondered the possibility of using magic to destroy the enemies of mankind. His gaze was wary, and a flame of determination lit in his eyes. He realized that the great power of magic could become a powerful weapon in their hands, capable of plunging enemies into dust. He imagined how he and Chloe, combining their strength and knowledge, could resist and destroy humanity. In his thoughts flashed images of powerful spells that could destroy their enemies and restore peace. However, along with this thought, came the realization of the danger of such a force. Adonis knew that magic has its price and can cause irreversible consequences. It requires careful handling and deep understanding so as not to plunge the world into even greater darkness. He understood that making a decision to use magic requires balance, fairness, and responsibility. Adonis, drawn by his thoughts, suddenly noticed an approaching sound. It was the sound of slowly approaching him. He turned in the direction of the sound and saw Chloe. Her hair was easily braided and her face was an expression of calm and determination. Adonis felt confused and somewhat confused. He found it hard to believe that she hadn't heard his words. He said he heard a sound, and Chloe apparently didn't hear any of what he said. Adonis felt puzzled and embarrassed at the same time. His heart beat faster as he realized that events could take an unexpected turn. There was a loud roar of motorcycles in the distance, which were rapidly approaching Adonis and Chloe. The sound of the engines wafted through the air, creating a tense atmosphere. The first contours of the dark silhouettes of motorcyclists became visible in the distance, breaking through the fog and haze. Motorcycles moved at incredible speed, raising clouds of dust and smoke behind them. The helmets and protective suits of motorcyclists made their faces unrecognizable, giving them mystery and aggressiveness. Their appearance was menacing, their appearance seemed to portend danger. The sounds of motorcycles became louder. From the roar and roar of the engines, it was clear that this was a patrol of the Imperial Border Guard motorcycle detachment. Powerful motorcycles, painted in black and gray, glided along the road, leaving clouds of dust in their wake. They were armed with rifles, which testified to their seriousness and professionalism. Helmets with darkened visors hid their faces, making them impenetrable and mysterious. Patrol moved strictly in a uniform order, demonstrating discipline and organization. The leader of the detachment, occupying the first place, was at the head of the column, directing his fighters to the target. His resolute gaze and strict manner of movement indicated that he was accustomed to command and did not tolerate doubts. The Imperial Border Patrol showed no emotion, maintaining a cold and ruthless appearance. The heroes were ready for any development of events, but they understood that a clash with the Imperial Border Service could bring them serious consequences. Unit 8 West, who was at the forefront of the patrol, took out a portable radio from its communication device and activated it. His voice sounded clear and decisive, spreading throughout the team. At this time, another soldier answered the call. His voice was low and authoritative, betraying his role at patrol headquarters. The receiver in his hand glowed, indicating an active connection. The voice was tinged with severity and organization, indicating a disciplined patrol command structure. A soldier of Unit 8 was approaching a group where a fugitive witch was. In his hands was a raised walkie-talkie, through which he communicated with the headquarters, transmitting important information. He was in full combat gear, with a reinforced bulletproof vest, a protective helmet and equipped with weapons. His face reflected determination and concentration, as he realized the importance of his task and the consequences that could arise if the fugitive witch was not immediately apprehended. He was ready for any development of events and completely devoted to the fulfillment of his duty. The soldier approached the group where the witch was, assessing the situation and considering the optimal plan of action. He was cautious and prepared for possible resistance from the witch. The soldier was part of the team, and his every move was coordinated with the other members of the patrol. He followed a strategic plan that was developed by the headquarters for the effective and safe apprehension of the fugitive witch. In his hands held a weapon ready for use. The soldier of Unit 8 rode confidently forward, holding his reliable weapon in his hands. In his hands flashed the barrels of an automatic rifle, ready for use. Every movement was thought out and designed for efficiency and accuracy. His military equipment was fully functional and ready for battle. On his body were a protective bulletproof vest and a tactical vest, on which the necessary accessories and ammunition were located. His helmet with a transparent face shield protected his head and face, ensuring safety and good visibility. He used the right techniques of movement, using shelters and terrain for his own benefit. His training included team combat tactics, obstacle avoidance, and the application of various strategies in a pursuit situation. He relayed information about his position and gave instructions to his comrades to ensure the harmonious work of the team. The soldier was sent to intercept with high determination